There is a clip of Fernando Mendoza that most people missed. It did not trend the way the draft night footage trended. It did not circulate the way the minicamp throwing clip circulated. It came from a post-game show appearance, a relatively low-key setting where the cameras are rolling and the moment feels casual enough. Sitting down with James Jones and the crew after the draft is the single most important thing I have heard from this. It was true in the specific way that reveals who a person actually is beneath all the carefully managed presentation. He talked about leadership. He talked about the concept of equity within a team environment, about how the right to hold people accountable is not something that comes with a jersey number or a draft position. It gets built through performance and through genuine human investment in the people around you. And then, in the middle of that conversation, he said something that I suspect caught most listeners slightly off guard. He admitted that toward the end of his time at Indiana, once he had built real standing with his teammates through years of consistent work and consistent results, he became, in his own words, kind of an a-hole sometimes, because he wanted the standard held, because he demanded capable of, and he was willing to create real friction. To that kind of admission is to treat it as a charming, self-deprecating anecdote and move past it. It is not an anecdote. It is one of the most revealing things a young quarterback can say about himself, and the fact that he said it with such clarity and self-awareness makes it even more significant. Here is the thing I want you to understand about franchise quarterback profiles at the NFL level. The ones who sustain success over long careers, the ones who win in November and win in January, and create the kind of locker room cultures that attract the players who make the difference in close games, they are almost never the ones who are universally easy to be around. Peyton Manning was notoriously demanding. Tom Brady's sideline intensity has been documented extensively, and the players who won with him have talked about how much he pushed people in ways that were genuinely uncomfortable. Patrick Mahomes has moments of visible, directed frustration that remind you this is not a player passively accepting mediocrity from the people around him. The competitive intensity that makes great quarterbacks great is the same intensity that occasionally makes them difficult to share a huddle with when the standard is not being met. My quiet concern going into this draft process was never the arm talent. It was never the accuracy or the football intelligence or the processing speed that made Mendoza the consensus top quarterback in this class. It was the personality, because in every interview, in every media setting, in every public interaction I had watched him navigate, he came across as so genuinely warm and likable and humble that I found myself asking a question I could not fully answer. Does he have the edge? Does he have the competitive ferocity that allows a quarterback to look a teammate in the eye and tell him that his effort is not acceptable and mean it with enough conviction that the teammate actually changes his behavior? Because that quality is not universal among talented quarterbacks, and its absence tends to reveal itself in the fourth quarter of close games and in the middle of losing streaks when the standard of daily work starts eroding and nobody in the building has the standing or the willingness to arrest the slide before it becomes catastrophic. Derek Carr is the reference point I keep coming back to, and I say this with genuine respect for everything Carr gave this franchise over the years he was here. He was a real leader in many ways. His teammates loved him, his presence in the locker room was positive, and his care for the people around him was authentic and not performed. But there was always a dimension of leadership that felt slightly out of reach for him, and it showed up most clearly in that press conference after the loss to the Jeff Saturday-led Colts, where the frustration that had been accumulating over an entire difficult season finally poured out through tears and references to wishing some people worked as hard as others. What that moment revealed was not weakness. It revealed a quarterback who had not found a way to channel his competitive expectations directly and consistently, whose frustration had been building in private, because the interpersonal tools for addressing it in the moment had not fully developed. That gap between caring deeply about the standard and being able to enforce it in real time is a genuine limitation at this position. And I had a version of that concern about Mendoza until he answered it himself. What he described in that clip is not accidental leadership. It is a sophisticated understanding of how influence actually works inside a team environment. He articulated the concept of equity before deploying it. He understood that the right to make demands of people is not a function of your draft position or your contract value or your status in the public conversation around the team. It is earned through the accumulated credibility of performing at a high level and genuinely investing in your teammates as human beings. And only once that equity is established does the accountability that comes with real leadership actually land rather than creating resentment. That is not something a 22-year-old usually articulates that clearly. That is a level of emotional intelligence about leadership dynamics that most NFL veterans spend years learning through costly mistakes. The warmth is real. The humility is real. And underneath all of it, clearly, is a competitive intensity that he has already learned to deploy with the kind of precision that separates difficult to be around from genuinely effective. That combination is rare. That combination wins. Now I want to get into the quarterback competition question, because this is the conversation that has been developing all around minicamp coverage, and I have been genuinely wrestling with it before landing somewhere I feel confident about. Kirk Cousins versus Fernando Mendoza for the Week 1 starting job. I am going to walk through this honestly, rather than performing a conclusion I arrived at before examining the evidence, because I think the honest version of this debate is more interesting and more useful than the tribal version that tends to dominate these discussions. The case for starting Mendoza immediately is real, and I do not want to dismiss it. When you watch the minicamp footage, the ball is coming out with genuine authority. The zip and the placement are not what you expect from a quarterback operating in a completely new professional system with no pads and no live competition. The throws are landing on time and in locations that require real accuracy rather than the favorable circumstances of a controlled drill. And when I compare what I see from Mendoza's arm right now to what Cousins has shown over the last 2 seasons, I am genuinely uncertain that there is a significant physical advantage on Cousins' side anymore. At 37 years old, coming off a limited run in Atlanta, where he went 5-3 in 8 appearances with functional but unspectacular statistical output, Cousins is a veteran quarterback who manages situations competently rather than a player who can consistently impose his will on games through physical dominance. Mendoza at his ceiling is a different kind of player than Cousins at his ceiling. The question is whether you access that ceiling in September, or whether you protect the process of reaching it by introducing him to professional adversity on a managed timeline. The argument that has genuinely moved me, and I want to be transparent, that it moved me somewhat reluctantly, because the fan inside me wants to see Mendoza on the field from Week 1, is about the specific kind of damage that can be done to a young quarterback's long-term development when the infrastructure around him is not fully ready. There are credible reports from inside league circles suggesting that the Raiders' organizational intention is to allow Mendoza to develop before exposing him to the full weight of what a starting role in the NFL actually demands on a weekly basis. The framing I have heard from people close to the situation is that this may not be the roster in its current state that is optimally built for Mendoza to succeed immediately, and that the 2 to 3 year timeline before the full picture is in place is a realistic rather than pessimistic projection. Now, I do not fully accept the most conservative version of that timeline. This roster has more genuine competitive infrastructure than some of those assessments give it credit for. Brock Bowers is a real and dangerous weapon at tight end. Ashton Jeanty brings an explosiveness to the backfield that changes how defenses allocate their defensive resources. The offensive line investment has been real and meaningful. These are not cosmetic additions. These are pieces that give a young quarterback real weapons to work with. But the structural core of the developmental argument is not wrong, and I have made my peace with it. There is a meaningful distinction between mental toughness and battle-tested resilience, and Mendoza has the first but has not yet fully developed the second, because the second can only be built through actual professional adversity rather than simulated preparation. And the specific adversity that damages young quarterbacks in lasting ways is not losing games. Losing games is part of the developmental process, and the quarterbacks who benefit most from it are the ones who have the competitive infrastructure around them to fight through the losing, rather than simply absorb it. What breaks young quarterbacks in ways that take years to repair is losing while structurally unprotected, getting hit repeatedly because the offensive line is not winning its matchups, throwing into contested coverage because the receivers are not creating the separation the route concept requires, making panic decisions because the pocket is collapsing before the route has reached its breakpoint. That kind of sustained adversity does not build resilience in developing quarterbacks. It builds compensatory habits, distorted mechanics, and a risk-averse decision-making framework that protects the quarterback's body in the moment while limiting his development for years afterward. Cousins can absorb the early turbulence of a season in ways that protect Mendoza's long-term trajectory. He can operate within Kubiak's system at a functional level, keep the offense coherent and competitive, and win some games that might otherwise be lost, while the offensive infrastructure continues to develop its rhythm around what is being asked of it. More importantly, he provides the locker room stability that a young roster finding its professional footing in the first months of a new coaching staff's tenure genuinely needs. The dynamic of having a proven veteran managing the offense while the rookie class develops its baseline competency is one that has worked in building situations before, and the organizational security that Kubiak has been given to operate with full runway rather than immediate results removes the pressure that typically distorts these decisions. He is not coaching for his job in year one. He is not going to panic and accelerate the Mendoza timeline because the crowd is restless or the early results are disappointing. That security is not a small thing. It means the decision gets made based on what is actually right for the quarterback's development rather than what generates the most immediate external excitement. So where I have actually landed is this: Cousins starts. If the offense looks functional through the first 4 to 6 weeks, if the results reflect a team that is competitive even in the games it loses, rather than one that is getting systematically dismantled without the ability to respond, you stay the course and let Mendoza continue building his command of the system in a lower stakes environment. If the offense deteriorates into something that looks genuinely broken rather than just struggling, if the football is bad in the diagnostic sense rather than simply not producing good outcomes yet, then you make the transition and find out what Mendoza can do with the real thing. Because ultimately the objective is not to win with Kirk Cousins. It is to build a quarterback who can carry this franchise to 11 or 12 wins annually for the next decade. And sometimes the most aggressive thing a franchise can do for its future is protect the process of getting there, even when the impatient version of the decision would feel more satisfying in the short term. German McCoy keeps pulling my attention back, and the more I sit with everything I know about his current physical situation, the more I believe he is going to be on the field in some real capacity this season. The medical situation is real, and the surgery he eventually needs has not been removed from the equation. But the fact that he showed up at minicamp and participated in punt return drills is not a small piece of information. You do not put a player with a genuinely fragile knee through return specialist work unless the medical staff has real confidence in where his body is functioning right now. The Raiders are not operating around this situation with excessive caution. They are operating with the measured confidence of an organization that has evaluated the risk carefully and decided the risk is manageable. The most logical scenario I see is that McCoy plays through this season, demonstrates his health and his ability at the professional level, and then the Raiders make the calculated decision to address the surgery after year 1, accepting a portion of the 2027 season as the cost of extending his long-term career window significantly. That math works. A healthy McCoy through multiple seasons in the prime of his career is worth considerably more to this franchise than the alternative of addressing the surgery immediately and watching that development time evaporate. And if that projection proves correct, the 4th-round selection that scared evaluators away becomes one of the most significant value acquisitions in recent Raiders history. Here's the thing that I want to leave you with, because I think it is easy to get absorbed in the individual conversations around competition timelines and medical situations, and forget the larger picture that all of these individual pieces are painting. What we are watching come together in Las Vegas right now is different in kind from what previous Raiders rebuilding efforts looked like in their early stages. The differences are structural rather than cosmetic, and structural differences produce durable outcomes in ways that cosmetic ones never do. The coaching philosophy is clear and enforced from the first day of the first practice without exception or negotiation. The quarterback is exactly who his tape and his post-game conversation and his hotel room extra reps suggest he is. Humble enough to know he has to earn everything in this building and competitive enough to make things genuinely uncomfortable for the people around him when they stop operating at the standard he has decided is acceptable. Those two qualities existing together in the same player, particularly at this position, are genuinely uncommon. Their coexistence in Fernando Mendoza is the reason this rebuild feels different from the inside in a way that previous ones never quite did. The debates we are having about this franchise right now are debates about upside and development trajectories and how quickly real excellence can arrive. They are not debates about which quarterback we need to survive with until the next regime takes over and starts the process again from scratch. That is the actual difference. That is what it feels like when the right foundation is in place. Enjoy watching it develop in real time, because these early chapters are worth paying attention to.